Maybe in the new year, we should start trading off who opens the episode.
But we have such a good thing going on now.
All right. Hello and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah. And I'm not going to start doing the intro.
I thought I'd offer at least.
You do such a wonderful job. I wouldn't want to take it from you.
Well, thank you. Other than my incredible introduction skills, Sarah, what's something great that happened this week?
I took a nap today. It was only about an hour long, but it was still a nap and it was still lovely.
Wait, an hour is a great nap length.
I mean, I like my naps to be like 2 or 3 hours.
Oh, okay. That's just second sleep.
Well, yes, that's what a nap is for me. But this was an hour and it was delightful and I needed it and I was very pleased. And Lily, what's something good that happened to you?
I got new glasses.
That's exciting. They look nice.
Oh, thank you. I'm still getting used to them. Getting new glasses is always sort of like
There's an adjustment period for sure.
Yeah, your face looks different. Who is this person? I don't know.
I hate how they look.
Oh, yeah. You never like glasses the first time you put them on.
No. Even if you liked them when you were trying them on, it's just living with them is a very different feeling.
Also, it's been a couple years since I updated my prescription, so I'm a little dizzy. My depth perception is bad enough, and I'm suddenly throwing everything out of whack by actually being able to see things. It's
That's
good.
A concept.
It's a good thing. I'm not going to complain about my good thing. I needed glasses. It's been a while.
Well, I'm glad that you got new glasses.
Thanks. Well, Sarah, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking a whiskey, a Japanese whiskey that I was given in our family Secret Santa exchange.
Oh, fun.
Which reminds you, I need to ask who actually was my Secret Santa so I can send them a thank you note.
Did they not say?
They did not. They did not say. Yeah.
Well, luckily I am Santa, so I can reveal everyone's secrets.
I know who delivered it, but that only tells me which family group it was likely from and not the individual.
Yes.
But I would like to send them a thank you note. So that is what I'm drinking. What are you drinking?
I'm working through my bottle of Hennessy. Why do I have this? Oh, it was for the stress of her regard. Back when we did that book, there's so much cognac in it that I was
that makes sense.
It's not my usual drink though, so now I just have it. So
you got to figure out a lot of Hennessy cocktails.
I mean, tea. You can find the right tea for anything.
I meant if you wanted to explore, try new things.
I mean, that's not outside the realm of possibility, but it's cold and tea is warm.
This is true. It is cold and tea is warm. Usually, I guess you can drink iced tea, but I am assuming in these circumstances you are not.
This is correct. Well, since we are technically a book podcast, Sarah, have you read anything good lately?
I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and I have to confess that I found myself a little disappointed by this book. I was expecting to really love it, given everything I'd heard about it. And maybe it was that I had heard too much about it and it was overhyped for me. But I didn't really enjoy reading about the main character. He was very, very anxious, and that kind of colored all of his interactions. So he works for this governmental department that oversees magical orphanages, essentially. And he's a cog in the machine, and he cares about doing the right thing and sticking to the rules. But everyone else in his department is really mean and unfeeling, and he has this very over-the-top mean neighbor. And that's all. He lives in the city, and that's all to contrast with how great it is when he goes to this orphanage by the sea on an island, and how great everyone there is. And I don't know, it was sweet, but it just didn't hit right for me. And I can see why people really, really loved it. And I enjoyed it. I just didn't love it the way I expected to love it.
Well, I'm glad at least the experience of reading it was fun overall.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. And there were parts of it that I really think are valuable. Like it's a queer romance and the main character is like middle-aged and pudgy. And I think that it's great to have that, like more of that representation in fiction and fantasy, but it wasn't necessarily the book for me. I am still really looking forward to reading the other book by the same author. It's not a sequel, but I think it's kind of similar in themes. The cover art is very similar. The cover art is beautiful. Both of the titles have houses on them that I really want to make in The Sims because they look very simmable. So yeah, I guess I don't really have anything else to say about it.
Well, all right.
Have you read anything lately?
No, but I did watch The Witcher.
Oh, don't tell me spoilers because I haven't managed to watch it yet.
Okay, well, but I loved it so much.
I'm really looking forward to it.
So I know people complain about the timeline thing in season 1. That didn't bother me at all.
Well, you were familiar with the show before.
I hadn't played the games.
No, but your husband had.
Yeah, but he was more confused by the timelines than I was.
I thought that he was there explaining things for you.
Just like, oh, that's Triss. You can bang her in the game.
Okay.
Like
that's less explanation than I was expecting. The timeline stuff really confused me in the first, like, I didn't mind it, but it really confused me in the first season.
The game, or at least the third one, which is what I am playing now, is far after the show. Like it's not useful context for the show. Except, well, no, this is a spoiler for season 2. I understand why adaptation purists might be annoyed with some of the choices they've made. I disagree with that annoyance, but I see where they're coming from.
Is it okay? In as vague as terms as possible, because we're not doing spoiler tags. Unless you wanted to move this conversation to a Witcher check-in.
I don't want to spoil it for you.
Yeah. Okay. So in as vague as terms as possible, are they upset because it's not a one-to-one adaptation, or?
Oh, I don't actually know. I just have seen people going, they've changed so much. The settings are all perfect reproductions. Like the Kaer Morhen setting is like one-to-one what you explore in the game, which is pretty cool.
That sounds really neat. Yeah.
There's a character who I have not actually met yet, but I know exists in the books more than in the games, I think, who is introduced in the show, but is really extremely underutilized.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming, well, if that's not what people are mad about, then they can just go suck it. If that is what they're mad about, then I get it.
Mm-hmm. And I don't have any context for The Witcher. We read the short stories.
There's more story. Oh, one of the short stories is in season 2. That's why I'm like,
you did tell me about that. Yeah, you did say that.
It's really good. I love it. It's just that one character is underutilized. That's all I'm going to say. I understand why fans of that character would be mad about that.
Yeah, because I was going to say that I know for The Wheel of Time, which I have promised I wouldn't harp on too much about for you, there are some book purists who are very unhappy because the first season deviated quite a lot from the first book. Mostly it was in that it pulled in aspects of later books that contradicted some of what Jordan wrote in the first book, because like Jordan had solidified his world and how his world worked by later books, and that was still kind of fluid in the first book. But it doesn't sound like that's necessarily the case for The Witcher.
Well, it's different for The Witcher because there is a series of books and there's also a series of video games, and those aren't perfect between each other. And so the show is kind of sitting in a middle ground between them.
Mm-hmm.
And so asking it to be perfect for either is just unrealistic.
Yeah, it pulls from both of them and thus is a one-to-one of neither.
Exactly. But I think that's good. Like, it has adapted this story for the screen, which neither of the other methods of storytelling is right for.
I mean, I think with very, very rare exceptions, and I'm maybe the only exception is Good Omens, I think a one-to-one adaptation of a book for screen doesn't work. It's just not possible.
Well, and a one-to-one video game adaptation would also be terrible. That would be a bad show.
Yeah, like it just wouldn't be enjoyable.
I loved it. It was fantastic.
I'm excited to watch it.
Speaking of witchers, how's that for a transition?
A for effort.
I've realized with our new episode format, how am I going to shoehorn in our journey to the center of the Discworld?
Well, I think you just managed, so
I'm going to have to get really creative. It's going to be a problem.
I believe in you. You can do it, Lily.
But also, that's where we are now.
We are, and it was one of my favorite witch books.
It was really good.
I love Witches Abroad. Witches Abroad is probably one of the Discworld books that I read most often because it's so good.
It's so good.
It's so good. Like, everything about this book is just chef's kiss. Except maybe, as you pointed out, there is a joke on page 48.
Oh, no, I loved this joke. Are you kidding?
Okay.
It's one of my favorite.
It's not the joke itself. It's the verbiage.
It was a very good joke. So Greebo is Nanny Ogg's cat. And he's a scrappy little tomcat. And one of the descriptions of him very early on in the book is, "This is because Greebo, as a matter of feline pride, would attempt to fight or fuck absolutely anything, up to and including a 4-horse logging wagon." This is a great joke. Unfortunately, you're not allowed to use the word fuck. And so he said rape instead, and that's not funny.
No.
It's extremely uncomfortable and not good at all.
No. This book was written in 1991. I think that Terry Pratchett intended the implications of fuck rather than rape, but the words that get printed do matter.
Well, I think this is more of a comment on censorship issues and weird ratings applications.
I don't necessarily disagree with you there, but I also think that in 1991 the terms were conflated a little bit more. I mean, I think I was 1 year old.
Yeah, I don't
really know if I can make strong statements about that, but
I think as an expletive, the fuck word was worse back then.
That, yeah.
What is it? You can have it show up once in a movie and it's PG-13, but if it happens twice, then it's rated R, no matter what else is in the movie. That's like a hard and fast rule.
Yeah.
I don't even know if Pratchett is the one who used that word. Maybe an editor made him change it. Because for some reason, raping is better than fucking in someone's mind somewhere, which is a little bit horrific.
Yeah, it's certainly a choice, and not a great one.
No, but if we can gloss over that, you really can't. I got to that and I was like, oh no. I really love Greebo. He's a very sweet cat. He's a monster. But
yeah, I was going to say sweet is not the word that I would use. I love Greebo too, but sweet is not the word that I would use to describe him.
It's the word Nanny Ogg would use to describe him.
Yes, but Nanny Ogg is Greebo's caretaker, and thus she has a little bit of a biased view towards him.
Well, backing up, well, I think that is just a poorly written line. We do actually see later in the book, and I'm not going to talk about the actual context because that is spoilers. Greebo makes it advance on a potential love interest for his cat self and is confused by their reaction and so just walks away. So, like, obviously that was not the intention of the line, but language is weird.
Yeah.
Or language pearl clutchers are weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's true.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe a bad way to start this conversation about witches traveling.
Well, we start on a low note and end on a high note.
It's a very good book. That's a good joke, okay? It was just badly written.
Through potentially no fault of Pratchett's own.
I think that was the only thing in this book that made me go, yikes, which is an improvement from earlier Discworld novels.
Yeah, I think you're right. He has a lot of very funny insights on what makes someone civilized or not, but that's not yikes.
No, because he's actually making fun of people
who are quote unquote civilized. Yeah.
Yes. What is it? It's a superstition that uncivilized people have, and you know they're uncivilized because people who wear more clothes than them decided so.
Yes, basically. Right? Paraphrasing, but yeah.
There's also a lot of, well, the witches are abroad. They're traveling in foreign parts. And Nanny Ogg decides that she speaks foreign.
I mean, but she kind of does, though.
She does a mismatch of various romantic languages in awful phonetic approximations.
She gets her point across.
But it is mostly making fun of tourists than the languages themselves.
There's a line about how Granny thought that speaking louder would make her more understood.
Right.
This is just a really good book. I haven't reread Lords and Ladies enough. I've read Witches Abroad more, but I think Witches Abroad is my favorite witches book, possibly followed by Lords and Ladies.
So in Witches Abroad, it starts with a witch dying, which witches know, right? They have enough magic users in the Discworld have a good idea about when they're going to die.
That's one of the benefits of magic usage.
Yes, indeed. And especially this one, Desiderata, I think is her name.
Yeah, Desiderata.
Has some precognizance, so she is very familiar with what's going to happen.
She can't see through her actual physical eyes, so she has been able to utilize her second sight to see what's happening in the present instead of in the future. She
packages up a gift for Magrat, who is the youngest of our main witch characters, right? We have Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Ogg, and Magrat, which this is the book where we find out her name is a misspelling of Margaret. I don't think we knew. Did we know that before?
I thought we knew that before, but I've read these books so often that I couldn't necessarily tell you what comes up in which book.
I remember being surprised that it's not addressed in the earlier book, but maybe I'm misremembering. I don't know.
I mean, if you were surprised, then it probably wasn't addressed in Weird Sisters.
Anyway, so we have our coven, our main three witches, and Magrat, the youngest one, inherits Desiderata's magic fairy godmother wand and has to go save her fairy godchild. And so they set off on an adventure.
But Desiderata knew that she actually needed Granny's help. And so she told Magrat in a letter very specifically, don't let those other two interfering witches go with you. Which, of course, means that they will go with her, which she knew. She was practicing headology.
Yeah, I love that. Blatant manipulation that the witches use is very good. Or headology.
Especially because it's so often Granny who is using it against someone else. And so it's really satisfying to see it used against her.
100%. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, Granny's my favorite character, but also it's really satisfying to see someone understand her and, get one over her.
And use her pride against her.
Mm-hmm. It's like she's not infallible. She's just a very good witch.
One of the things I noticed in this book, so this is not the first book where we meet our three witches. We met them before in
Weird Sisters.
Weird Sisters, thank you. And Granny actually showed up in equal rights.
Equal rights, yes.
But the coven itself, we don't see until Weird Sisters.
Yeah, I feel like the granny in Equal Rights is kind of a proto-granny, because I believe Equal Rights is book 3 or 4, and he's really still figuring out what he's doing with the series and the characters at that point.
I feel like we have now gotten to a stretch of books where he's kind of redoing some of his early ones. We mentioned this with Reaper Man, and I kind of feel that way about this book as well, where Pratchett has circled back on these characters and he's like, okay, now I know who they are. Let me write this story how I wanted it to go. I think it's more like that with the Death series, Reaper Man. But I don't know. I don't know exactly where I land on this one. Just because, Sarah, you pointed out that our 3 witches are the archetypes, right? Maiden, Mother, and Crone. And so they kind of have to be the same characters in every book. Otherwise, that dynamic doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't really allow for a lot of very nuanced character change. And in fact, when Magrat moves from Maiden to Mother, she kind of ages out of the series.
So yeah, that's not in this book.
That's not in this book. No. That is not in this book. But it does happen, and we see another witch take her place as the maiden in the archetype. So you do kind of have to keep the characters static in that regard if you are basing them off of these tropes.
It just felt bad to see Magrat back where she started, because not Equal Rights, Weird Sisters is about her, like, kind of learning to stand up for herself. And in this book, she's right back where she started.
I don't feel like she learns to stand up for herself that much in Weird Sisters, though.
She definitely gains confidence that she loses somewhere in between these books.
She gains a little bit of confidence, but I don't know if I think she gains confidence in her witchcraft more than she gains confidence in herself.
Well, that's fine, because her witchcraft is all we really see in this book, and she still gets completely kicked around by Nanny and Granny.
I think that part of the point of this book is her seeing that witchcraft and sense of self are 2 separate things.
Right. She goes through character growth in this book, but I wish she didn't have to start from 0.
Yeah. That's fair. I'm just saying I don't necessarily think that she starts from 0. I think she starts from maybe like 5.
Okay. Fair enough. Similarly to the Death series, I also feel like we're getting some sort of recursive storytelling, but I feel like the character of Death grows more in those books, whereas he's going through the same plot line over and over again. Whereas with the witches, they're going on different adventures, like absolutely different stories are happening, but the characters sort of feel static, which is not a complaint except for Magrat. Like, Granny and Nanny don't need to change a thing. They should stay static. They're perfect. And
I don't really think that Granny and Nanny changed that much throughout this series as a whole.
And that's fair. Like, that's not my complaint. It really is just, it feels like we spent the whole book watching Magrat try to grow, and then none of it mattered.
I mean, again, I don't really think that she ends up having grown that much in Weird Sisters when I think about it.
Well, right. She still had growing to do, but...
No, but I'm saying that I don't actually think that she grows that much in Weird Sisters at all. And so I can understand why she is where she is in Witches Abroad.
It feels like that book didn't even happen, though. There's like a line about how she decided not to marry Terrence, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But in this book, it might as well have not happened. You don't have to read Weird Sisters to read this book.
No, this is very true. And I mean, I do think that Witches Abroad is a better place to start. Technically not the beginning, but Witches Abroad is a much better story than Weird Sisters.
Weird Stories is...
Weird Sisters.
Oh, God. Weird Sisters, thank you. Is following Macbeth and Hamlet-y Macbethy.
It's like 75% Macbeth and 25% Hamlet.
Whereas Witches Abroad, I can get book titles correct. is more of an exploration of fairy tales, which I think is a more fun version of witches. Love me some Shakespeare, but his version of witches is just not one that I find particularly compelling. And so being able to see these three characters in this setting, in this context of these really dark at their core fairy tales was very fun.
I think that seeing Pratchett explore witches in Shakespeare is interesting because you see how he kind of like pushes the limit of the appearance versus the actuality, but they have a lot more room to grow as characters when he is playing around with fairy tales and stories and how witches affect stories.
Absolutely. Well, witches in Shakespeare they're never really characters, right? They're practically just
no, but he also, I mean, he takes that and runs with it.
He takes that and runs with it, but you can still only run so far. Whereas in fairy tales, there's just so much more.
Yeah. I mean,
opportunity.
As I've said, I think that Witches Abroad is the superior story. So
right. I think if you like Shakespeare, you would love Weird Sisters. But if you think witches are cool, you'd like Witches Abroad better.
Probably. I mean, that's where I fall, as I like Witches Abroad better.
There are some other really excellent aspects of Witches Abroad that we have decided are spoilers, but you'll have to trust us.
So you're just going to have to wait, yeah?
So I did have to look up a joke. This happens to me sometimes, in Pratchett specifically. It's obvious that he's making a joke, and I'm like, fuck. Is this a British thing? Like, I don't get it. So I Googled the alligator joke. There's a couple times in this book where Granny Weatherwax says, oh, I know a joke.
Granny Weatherwax, who is not known for her sense of humor.
No, Nanny almost falls over when she's like, you do?
And then she completely fails in the telling of it.
Oh, she butchers the joke. And she tells it like 3 or 4 times and gets it wrong every time.
I was going to say 2 or 3 times, but she tells it multiple times.
Multiple times. At least 3, I think. Maybe exactly 3. A man walks into a bar with a sign that says, any kind of sandwich. And he orders, I would like an alligator sandwich. And make sure it's very quick.
When you told it to me earlier, you said it and make it snappy.
Well, that's the correct joke.
Yes.
Yes. I wanted to give them the granny joke first.
Okay.
No, the correct punchline is and make it snappy. But I did not get that at all.
No, to be fair, neither did I.
No. Googling it, I did find a neat website that just breaks down every single pun, joke, and reference in Pratchett, which was very neat. The annotated Pratchett. Anyway, so it explained the alligator joke to me, which I appreciated.
I appreciate that the icon on my browser or in the browser tab is the Netscape icon, but it has an L for L space. And that just takes me back, and I like it.
Well, Sarah, before we jump into our spoiler section, when should you read this book?
I think that if you are interested in witches, this is not a bad place to start.
Fairy tales. It's basically a standalone. I mean, it is part of the Witch series, but I don't think you need any earlier books to read this and enjoy it.
Yeah. I think you gain a little bit of very moderate benefit from having read Equal Rights and Witches Abroad for a slightly better understanding of all of the characters and their motivations, but you don't need that. Like, you can certainly read this as a first story without being lost or confused. And I think it's much better than Weird Sisters. So
I only went yikes once. So that was good. There are some very, very cool conversations around magic and good versus evil and
storytelling and the power of stories. Like, if you're interested in that, this is the story for you.
And fairy tales particularly.
Yeah.
Just because I know some people really, really love fairy tale retellings, so this would definitely be a book for you. And Greebo, if you want to read about cat shenanigans.
If you like cats.
I don't think he gets quite enough page time for that to be the only reason, but it's definitely a cherry on top.
He gets more page time than he did in, well, certainly Equal Rights, where he didn't show up at all. He does show up a little bit in Weird Sisters, but he shows up more in Witches Abroad.
And that's why it's a better book.
You're not wrong.
To avoid spoilers for Witches Abroad, skip to 5247.
So your note here just says Greebo.
Am I wrong, though?
You're not wrong, though.
Not only is Greebo an excellent, malevolent cat, he gets turned into a human in this book. Kind of. He gets human-shaped.
He gets human-shaped. A big part of this book is animals getting human-shaped and how that affects them.
All of that within that fairy tale framework, right? You have the frog prince and
the wolf in Red Riding Hood and the mice as coachmen in Cinderella.
And horses. The rat horses.
Okay, but that's not animals turning into humans.
It still stresses them out, though. They don't like being two things.
This is true. It's not great for them.
Except for cats who already assume they're human. That's the reasoning in the book. And so this is actually, we're skipping way ahead to the end. The main framework of the plot, I would say, is Cinderella. That's mostly what we're working within. So our crew, the good guys, are trying to prevent Ella from being forced to marry the prince, forced through fairy tale shenanigans. And so how do they stop this carriage? They're unable to stop the horses and the footmen and everything.
Because stories have power and they have momentum. So you have to kind of choose your moment.
But you know who's great at killing mice?
Greebo.
So they turn Greebo, they give him a human shape, and he is constantly described as a dashing pirate. Cat Greebo is missing an eye, so he has an eye patch. He's all muscles and rugged dark hair, and there's a very hilarious moment when they first transform him and he's not wearing clothes, and they're like, oh, that's why all the lady cats are screaming. Anyway.
Greebo has a certain appeal, whether he's human or cat.
Well, I would say it's a different appeal. Or maybe different victims. That's my point, though. Human Greebo specifically does not rape anybody. Okay, I needed to loop back around to that awful joke.
He has a certain appeal. The appeal is the same.
Yes. Humans are constantly swooning at him because he's this rugged, roguish, piratey guy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he torments the rodents turned horses and footmen. But where I was going with this was when he eventually ends up in the castle and the noble ladies are all fawning all over him. I think one of them says, meet me in the rose garden, trying to set up a tryst. And he has no idea what that means. So he's just like confused and wanders away. Like there's no, that was just not the right word. Clearly,
it was not the right word.
And it bothers me quite a bit. It could have been really charming and funny.
I mean, this is one of those times where I really wish that Terry Pratchett wasn't dead, so we could ask if he had really meant fuck instead of rape.
I mean, he must have, right?
He must have.
He must have. Like clearly, Greebo cares about consent in his cat-human form.
I think the context of the rest of the story implies fuck, so...
The fact that we even have to analyze it that closely is ridiculous.
Yeah, but Terry Pratchett was taken from us too soon, so we cannot ask him that.
Anyway, human Greebo shenanigans. He tries to take an entire turkey off the banquet table and is like, why are you mad at me?
He's got a valid point, though. Well, he would, except that I don't like turkey, but
the why are you mad at me part. Anyway, human Greebo. It was good. And then he obviously ends up back as a cat, and it's fine.
Yeah, but he ends up back as a cat because it's his choice, and he wants to go back to his cat form.
Yes, but he actually gets turned back during the final confrontation when Lilith is taking all of the magic out of the town in a big fight.
Well, okay, that's true. But we see enough previously.
He's clearly decided that this form is not for him.
Yeah. We see him come to grips with the limitations of the human form and kind of decide that, yeah, okay, I would rather be a cat.
He tries to curl up in front of a fire and gets mad.
The human backbone isn't meant for this.
Mm-hmm. And that's enough, Greebo. Because we have not even touched on the excellent, excellent voodoo in this book.
And it is quite good.
Like I said, I only said yikes the one time. I feel like Pratchett actually did research instead of just making racist puns.
He's making progress with these books.
I'm no expert, but it felt so much more thoughtful, and
it felt a lot more considered.
Yeah,
I think, than some of his previous books have been. Like, he is thinking about the jokes that he's making, and he's being very thoughtful about whether or not they are appropriate to make.
And the jokes are much more often on the witches for being tourists than it is on the locals who
it's much less punching down.
Yes. Yeah, so Genoa, the town where this takes place, or the city where the main story takes place, is New Orleans, which is very cool. I mean, it's is New Orleans.
Yeah. A very French New Orleans.
And we got some really neat voodoo figures.
I mean, I don't want to call her a protagonist because she's not really.
Ella.
No. I was thinking Mrs. Gogol.
Oh, I think she's one of the main characters for sure. Not the protagonist. Okay, you're right.
She's not a protagonist. I think she's the main character, but I don't think she's a protagonist.
No, that's definitely Magrat.
Yeah.
Mrs. Gogol is definitely one of the best characters in this book.
Well, she is that, and she's the source of all of the voodoo.
There are a lot of very fun dualities in this book because it's kind of the whole fucking point of the book. But one of them is this difference and sort of dynamic between witchcraft and voodoo, which we see between our three witches and Mrs. Gogol, and how they have this sort of like not begrudging respect of each other, but a sort of distant respect. They don't want to be best friends.
I mean, they have to come to respect each other. They don't respect each other innately.
Granny doesn't. Nanny is on board right away.
Well, Nanny likes Mrs. Gogol because Mrs. Gogol is a good cook.
Yeah.
She makes a mean gumbo.
Granny is definitely more hesitant. And Mrs. Gogol, I think, from the beginning knew she was going to be able to use these brash outsiders to get her city back.
Yeah. I think Granny is more hesitant because Granny has a clearer view of people than Nanny does. Nanny believes the best in people. And I think Granny sees people as they are. And she sees that Mrs. Gogol is not a bad person, but is willing to use people the way that she's willing to use people. And so she's hesitant to really trust her. I
get more of a sense that it's a pride thing.
I think there's a little bit of that too.
Granny's not in charge in this city. Mrs. Gogol is. This city doesn't even know who witches are, but they know who Mrs. Gogol is.
I think there's that too, but I also think that Granny is just very cognizant of like who a person is versus who they present themselves to be. And she knows that Mrs. Gogol has the same capacity for power that Granny herself does. And like, if you don't do things right, then Mrs. Gogol will try to take over the way that Granny would try to take over if she wasn't held in check.
I guess I think that doesn't give Mrs. Gogol enough credit. I think Granny thinks that, but I think that's sort of filtered through her general distrust. I mean, she doesn't really trust Nanny either. So I think that's just how Granny is.
I mean, I think that it's kind of borne out, though, in that we see Mrs. Gogol want to try to take control of the city when, at the very end, when Ella...
She wants to kill Lilith. She folds on the city immediately.
She wants to kill Lilith, but part of that is also she wants to take control of the city, and she folds on both things ultimately. But like, she still wants them.
She goes into the city with the intention of helping Ella, or, you know, influencing Ella or whatever, which, okay, yes. Is that perfect? No. But like, Granny doesn't influence everyone. So that's just extremely hypocritical of her if she dislikes that.
No,
and when they point out that Mrs. Gogol should let the city breathe, she's like, yes, okay. But she still wants revenge on the woman who killed her lover. And the fact that they talk her out of that, I actually kind of hate.
I'm not refuting any of that. I'm just saying that I think that innate potential is what Granny is responding to. Like, I don't think that, for example, someone like Nanny Ogg would harbor those same feelings. And I think that Granny understands that, and Granny sees herself in Mrs. Gogol.
All right. I'm okay with that. I feel like Mrs. Gogol did not get treated great by the end of the book, by the way the book ended. I think they try to turn her into a secondary villain, and I was like, nah.
I didn't think that.
She's not a power-hungry monster. She's completely justified in trying to get revenge.
I didn't feel like they were trying to turn her into a secondary villain. I just thought that they were trying to point out that she has a reason for wanting revenge, and Granny's reason in this case kind of supersedes her, which is that Lilith is her sister.
Oh, I disagree with that completely.
She's going to get revenge on her sister.
My sister left, and so I had to be the only child is not as good of a reason as you murdered my lover and have been controlling my city as a dictator for however many years. Like, those are not the same thing at all.
No, I don't necessarily think it's a better reason, but I think that...
But Granny thinks it's a better reason, and she gets her way.
But Granny has more power, so right. She gets her way, yeah.
I guess her reason superseding that made me think conceptually it superseded it, not Granny muscled her way into getting what she wanted.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that this is an issue of power and who wields it. And Granny is simply more powerful, not necessarily in terms of magical strength, because we don't really know that, but in terms of mental strength, she's absolutely more powerful than anyone we have seen thus far. And so that gives her the, I don't want to say right, but that gives her the ability to take her revenge over anyone else who wants it.
Well, like what Magrat says several times throughout the book. She's the biggest bully, so she always gets what she wants.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to say that.
I mean, she is a bully. We love her, but she is a bully.
We love her when she's bullying scam artists, swindling people out of money playing cards.
Yes.
I do not love her when she's bullying Mrs. Gogol. Okay, the best scene in the entire book. It's Cinderella, right? You gotta have the glass slipper.
You have to have the glass slipper if it's Cinderella.
So they eventually end up installing Magrat as a decoy for Ella, right? They send Ella away to safety in the swamp with Mrs. Gogol and dress up Magrat with the mask and everything, because it's a masquerade ball. But the shoes don't fit, so she has to wear like 3 pairs of socks. And then we get there's a couple of climax conflict scenes, but one of them is Lilith, the evil fairy godmother, who's been the one controlling the city the whole time. She gets the shoe. Well, first Granny gets the shoe and shatters it to prevent the shoe fitting from happening. And then Lilith says they always come in pairs, which is, again, the whole point of the book. Everything comes in pairs. And they try to put it on Magrat's foot, and they say it fits. And the nanny storms up and says, well, anything will fit if you have to put on a bunch of socks. Not the queen, Lilith. She's not actually, is she? Yeah, she's not the queen, right?
She's not the queen, no.
She just fills that role, fairy tale wise. She says, that's fine, then we'll find the person it fits. And then Nanny says, it fits me. And she says, well, I'll marry the prince then. Don't worry, it'll be fine.
And I mean, she's right. There has to be a lot of 9.5s in the city. And you only get the right one if you happen to know which door to knock on first.
So that this is because Lilith intends to marry Ella to the frog prince, because that's just how fairy tales go. And so she's forcing this whole city to sort of conform to that story. And Ella doesn't want to because he's a frog. I don't think we know he's a frog at this point.
We know he's a frog at that point.
Okay. Well, we do. Ella doesn't.
Ella doesn't know, but I think that we know, or at least it's been very, very heavily implied.
They call him like strange and clammy through the entire book.
I think at that point, though, they've been in his bedroom.
Yes, the witches have.
Yeah, and they know that there's a pond instead of a bed, and there are a lot of flies around.
Nanny is so excellent. She's my favorite. I know you like Granny the best, but I definitely like Nanny Og the best.
I mean, this makes sense with our personalities.
It's true. She just completely bulldozes her way in there, and Lilith is trying to argue with it, right? You know, it has to be a woman of marrying age. And Nanny says, yeah.
Nanny is great in the scene.
I think one of my favorite parts, though, is the dwarf that she met earlier at the party and has been dancing with, and
the world's best lover.
According to him.
Also the world's best liar.
Yes. He's there during this, and I think I wrote down the page number because Casanunda is great. So in this scene, Nanny is explaining how she will marry the prince, and Casanunda just pops up out of the audience of everyone watching and says, I don't mind, says Casanunda from somewhere below. I enjoy open relationships. If you want to go out with a frog, that's fine by me. Just the way he rolls with it is so excellent.
He's quite good.
He's introduced very late in the book. Doesn't have a lot of page time, but just every time he shows up, he is pleasant and helpful, and it's really wonderful.
And I'm pretty sure that he shows up in other books too.
I hope so.
Yeah, like I think that he shows up in Lords and Ladies. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong, but I think he does.
His last scene in the book is comforting the woman who was waiting for human Greebo to come sweep her off her feet.
Which, good for him.
Right? Everyone's happy. Greebo gets to be a cat. Casanunda and this random lady get to have a night together. And Nanny Og gets to go home to her extended family. I also really liked the scene. Well, since we're talking about how great Casanunda and Nanny Og are, his first moment where he really shines is they go and they sabotage the clock to ring midnight early because the magic has to take place at midnight or something. That's just how fairy tales are.
Obviously.
So Nanny Og sneaks into the inner workings of the clock and is trying to make it speed up, I think.
Yes.
And she can't because it's a giant clock. But Casanunda is a dwarf.
Well, also, she doesn't know how clock hands work, clearly. I mean, as the daughter of someone who repairs clocks, like, she could just move the hour hand clock, or the hour hand hand.
I was under the impression they were on, like, the backside of the clock and that this thing was very large.
Yeah, but why can't you just go to the front and move the hour hand?
Because the front is okay. In my head, this is the clock that's like above the like it was over. They had to go up a bunch of stairs. I thought it was like above the courtyard. Like, what would you stand on in front of the clock?
I mean, I guess I'm just thinking, like, why would you not just hold on to the hand itself. I don't know. It seemed like there could have been an easier way. I'm just saying.
The easier way was that, I don't remember the exact phrasing in the book, but Nanny Og has been around town a few hundred more times than Magrat or Granny, and so she didn't find any shame in asking for help.
Yes.
And so she's like, hey, you do it. And he's like, all right. And then it's done and it's fine. And I liked that moment.
It is a good moment, to be fair.
I just don't understand where you think they would stand. Like, are they, like, they had to go through a closet to get to the inside.
Okay, so maybe this is me, but clocks fail all of the time. And sometimes what you have to do is just move the hour hand or the minute hand just a little bit, because it's not that you need to fix the clock itself, or it's not worth it to fix the movement itself. You just, have to change the hands. So if that's the case, where do you go?
I assume Lilith does it with magic.
That is not practical for a city like Genoa, which I think has a lot of basis in practicality before Lilith came.
Perhaps.
I think they would have had a clock tower that took that fact into account first.
I think she turned it into a bogus fairy tale city. And that was one of the points, right? She took this wonderful city with issues and problems, of course, but turned it into this awful fake Disneyland place.
But that doesn't mean that it didn't still have, it didn't still have real bits that worked.
That's true. And we don't know which bit they were in.
Yeah.
Because the fancy inner part of the city was all of the fake new stuff.
Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like the clock would have had at least, and not necessarily something that was super obvious to the outside, but I feel like it would have had at least something that allowed someone to adjust the hands without having to adjust all of the inner workings of it. Because honestly, that's what 9/10 of clock repair is. It's just adjusting the hands, because it's not worth it to adjust the actual mechanics.
I bet Nanny Og would have just gotten one of her in-laws to do it for her.
Probably, but I'm not sure that any of them were clock repair people.
I bet one of them is. Statistically, one of them likely is.
She does have a lot of in-laws, so it's possible.
Well, Sarah, you found an excellent Words Are Weird for today.
I did. For today's Words Are Weird, we have a literal Words Are Weird straight from the mouth of Terry Pratchett, who said, she looked expectantly at the other two. That foreign for bum, she added. Although it's a funny thing. In some foreign parts, bum means tramp, and tramp means hobo. Funny things, words. And if that's not a Words Are Weird, then I don't know what is.
Words are funny, it's true. What is the word for bum that she says? The foreign word. Oh, derriere.
Yes.
The phonetic spelling of other languages is very funny.
It is. I think that's one of the high points of this book, to be honest. Seeing Nanny Og translate foreign, it's very good.
I think my favorite is that she's just doing 3 different languages at once, too.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because if it was just one, they'd be picking on it?
I mean, she's doing 3 different languages, but badly.
Oh, right. But my point is, if it was just one language, they'd be picking on that language.
Yes.
But
yeah,
because she's clearly just picked up random words and she just slings them together.
And somehow it works for her.
I wasn't unclear if these people they were talking to actually could not speak whatever language, English, we'll just say.
I think that they mostly understand English, but they don't not understand Nanny Og, but they do sometimes have issues understanding Granny.
Okay.
Which is to say, I think it's all a little bit unclear.
Yeah.
And what works for the story is not always what makes sense for the reader.
There were some parts where I got the impression they were just humoring her, which is almost even better.
I think there were definitely parts where they're humoring her.
Like, if she turns to her friends and says, I'll ask them for 3 beers, and then she turns to them and says some absolute gibberish. Like, they heard her say she was going to ask for 3 beers, so.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Come disagree with us. We are on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow us wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated. Bye.
Bye.